Hi guys, how are you all? It's Devjit this side. So in this video, we advantages and disadvantages based questions. So there can be a lot of type of advantages based questions, right? Like what are the advantages of microservice? What are the disadvantages of microservice? What are the disadvantages of REST API? So these kind of questions just gets triggered during interviews, and we are just thinking more that we have made use of microservices a lot. We have made use of REST APIs a lot, but when we think about disadvantage, then the points are not coming at that point of time. So you also might be facing similar kind of thing in your mind, right? Ki why disadvantage advantages are not coming into my head. Basically, you haven't thought about like whether there can be any disadvantages of these things or not, because we are using it on a day-to-day basis, right, in our projects. So those all things we will be discussing in this video. So without delay, let's get started. I hope you can see my screen now. So we'll be starting with the advantages and disadvantages type questions. So first question can be, what are the advantages of microservices? Okay, so this is one of the important question, but the question generally focuses upon the disadvantages of it. But we should be knowing both advantages and disadvantages. Okay, so before proceeding ahead, so you should be very much knowing like why we should go for microservices. So there is a difference between choosing monolithic kind of application or microservice based application. So there can be a reason. Okay, there are multiple reasons based upon which we decide whether to go for monolithic based application or we should go for microservice based application. So we have to think in such a way based upon our requirement. Like if requirements are less, number of functionalities are very less, so in that scenario we can go ahead with monolithic based application. But let's suppose there are 15-20 functionalities, there are a lot of functionalities, and each functionalities are working independently and they are communicating with each other. So we can take example of Zomato or Swiggy. So what is happening in that scenario? So in that scenario, there will be customer. Okay. So, and on that side, there will be application. Okay. So customer will be choosing food from the menu. So in menu, there can be multiple food items, right? It can be veg item, it can be non-veg item, it can be dessert, it can be various kind of food items available for the customers. Okay. So what customers will do? Customer will choose from that entire menu. It can be burger, it can be North Indian, it can be South Indian, it can be various types. So it is linked to the particular restaurant, like which restaurant is selling which kind of food products. So all kind of restaurant details will be there in a Zomato application. All customer data will also be there. Okay. So we can't see that it will be there in their database basically. Okay. So whenever the customers are enrolling, okay, whenever customers are registering themselves in the application, so there will be the notification, email notification or message notification sometimes you might be getting on application. Like these kind of small notifications you might be getting on Zomato, right? Like there is some yummy new dessert kind of thing came. So have you tried it yet? If you haven't tried, you can just order it from your home. So these kind of notifications are coming in your Zomato applications, right? So there is a specific kind of microservice for that as well. Okay. So each and every step, there are multiple functionalities starting from person, customer ordering food. There will be food item, then there will be payment section, then there will be notification section, then there will be delivery boy. Okay, so there will be a Zomato delivery boy who will deliver the food item to the end users. Okay, so there are multiple functionalities. So for that, microservice is essential. We can't put it in monolithic application. Why? Because if one of the segment fails, let's suppose if payment fails, or if let's suppose Zomato delivery boy not available, so in any kind of scenario, entire application will get shut down. So we have to understand based upon our requirement that whether we should go for monolithic based application or microservice based application. Okay, so you might have got an idea. So let's understand as per the context of today's video, like what are the advantages. So let's understand advantages. So first is scalability. Okay, so each and every independent services can be scalable. Okay, scalable in the sense like each and every services can work independently and we can add functionalities based upon the type of services. Okay, and then let's suppose more and more number of customers are coming in and we have to adopt the functionality based upon the number of end users and their requirements. So we can scale them each and every services independently and it becomes very much easy. Okay, because each and every type and functionalities are divided among different kind of microservices, which allows for better resource allocation. Okay, so I hope you got the idea of this. Second type is independent deployment. Each and every microservices can be deployed independently. In monolithic, what happens? Entire set of application needs to be deployed if there is only one small change. Each and every services should be deployed in one single go. So that is the major drawback. So it will take around 1 hour just to deploy one small change. But in microservice, if there are multiple functionalities, you just need to deploy that particular microservice. You don't need to deploy other microservices. That means all microservices will work independently. I hope you guys are understanding, right? Third is fault isolation. Okay. So if there is fault in one service, it doesn't bring down or put down the entire ecosystem of the application. Okay, so one application can have multiple functionalities. There can be multiple chaining of networks. So if one application goes down, then it should not entire application should not go down. Okay, so failure in one of the service should not bring down the entire application. So that fault isolation mechanism is also there. Okay, so there is circuit breaker mechanism. Okay, there is Netflix. Okay, restricts fault tolerant mechanism is there that you can operate with. So that is very important to understand from microservice perspective. Okay, then technology flexibility is there. Okay, so teams can choose their best technologies. There can be like tens and twenties of microservices. So each microservice can work independently by one developer with their own language. Okay, so let's suppose there is one microservice built by one developer in Python. Another microservice can be built separately by another developer with C++ or with Java as well. Okay, and both microservices can communicate with each other. So this is one of the flexibility, technology flexibility is there with microservice, which is one of the biggest advantage, okay, with microservice. But in monolithic, you can't divide programming languages among the entire application. Okay, or if one is in Java, the entire application should be in Java. The developers should know Java to implement anything, any functionality in monolithic application. So this is one of the important advantage. So these are the advantages for microservices. Okay, so if there are so many advantages, there should be some disadvantages as well, right? So now let's understand what are the disadvantages of microservices. So these are some of the disadvantages. First is increased complexity. Managing multiple services, it involves a lot of complexity. So each and every time, if more and more number of customers are coming, more and more number of people are coming onto that application, then complexity will be increased. Okay, and we have to manage multiple microservices. It becomes a very much tedious. Okay, there should be multiple developers to manage those microservices. So it increases the cost of maintenance as well. Okay, so that is one of the major disadvantage. Second disadvantage is data consistency. Okay, so we have to ensure that there is consistency across entire services. So it might be challenging at times whenever we have to drive the event driven type of application. Okay, so in Zomato kind of thing, there is a proper order should be followed, right? The customer is ordering food from the menu. Okay, after that food is being ordered by the customer, then payment is being done, then there should be a notification that yes, payment is completed. The each and every step there is an event being happened. Okay, so there should be event should be successful. So once event is successful till the last, when Zomato delivery boy has been assigned and that particular food has been delivered to the customer's address, so till that point of time there are 6 to 7 events. So each and every event should be with success. Okay, if it is failure at any point of time, the entire previous set of functionalities will be rolled back. So there will be data consistency challenges. Okay, so in future, let's suppose some other kind of functionalities has been added over here, then it becomes very much challenging, right? So now there are 4 to 5 events are there. So in future it can have 7, 8, or 10 events. So it becomes very much tedious at that point of time. So maintenance is overall the most tedious task in microservice. Okay, and there is high resource usages. So that we have to understand here, like each service may require its own instances, which increases the cost of that infrastructure. So each and every microservice are built upon certain instances, right? So it needs to be deployed. So each and every microservices can have a separate deployment functionalities. Okay, so that also takes a lot of money, right? There is a resource usages. So if we are deploying on AWS, so each microservice has to be deployed independently on AWS, which requires a separate kind of cost. So anyways, it is pay as you go model in AWS, but still you have to pay, right? If there are 10 microservices and out of that 5 microservices are being used heavily, so we have to pay hefty amount on those 5 microservices. Okay, so it requires infrastructure cost as well. Okay, so network latency is there. Okay, so communication between the two services can add to latency. Okay, so what can happen? There are multiple microservices which can communicate with each other. So let's suppose there is a microservice calling B, B is calling C, C is calling D. Like that, there can be multiple microservice chaining with communication happening between multiple microservices. So let's suppose one of the microservices in between is not responding properly. So let's suppose A microservice is calling B, B is calling C. When C is trying to call D microservice, at that point of time, what is happening? D is not responding. Then how will you handle? We have to make it fault tolerant as well. So after making fault tolerant also, it will take some time to give the response, right? So there will be some kind of network latency. So that is also one of the disadvantage. Yes, we can solve it with circuit breaker, but still it will take some time to give certain messages, right? And whenever you face any challenges in any of the microservice, like it is not giving proper response or there is improper output, so we need to debug that, right? So debugging becomes very much challenging at times. So that also we have to keep in mind. So if there are multiple microservices, we should have a discussion that those many microservices are really required or not. We have to think from the scalability perspective. We have a vision of 5 to 10 years down the line, like whether it's required or not in next set of future stages, like in next 4 to 5 years. That we have to think, and then we have to go ahead and implement. We should have a system design concepts in place before actually going for implementation. We should not jump directly into implementation. Before implementing, we need to design, we need to do the low level design of it. Then we have to go for high level designing. Okay, so both should go hand in hand. So we have to understand this. So this system design concept should go. Okay, that we have to understand. So testing complexity is there, like integration and end-to-end testings are more complex. Okay, which is compared to in monolithic application, there is a one flow, in entire one flow, you can test the entire application. But in case of microservice, it's not the case. There is one service which is calling another, then B is calling C. So there can be chain of microservices. So how will you test it? So in during testing also we have to test multiple microservice calls also, no? No. So if one of the microservices is failing, then it will fail the entire flow. So testing also becomes very little bit more difficult, especially end-to-end testing, integration kind of testing. Okay, I hope you got a clarity with respect to advantages and disadvantages of microservices. So now microservices completed. So now what will be the next point, next topic? Just imagine the next point will be REST API. So this question also has been asked to me in the interview. From my experience, I'm telling you this is very important, especially what are the disadvantages of REST API. So before moving ahead with disadvantages of REST API, just try to understand the advantages of REST API. So what are the advantages of REST API? The first is platform independence. So REST API actually work over HTTP calls. Okay, so there are multiple mappings for HTTP, right? There can be get mapping, post mapping, put mapping, delete mapping. There can be multiple kind of mappings which makes them accessible from any device or any platform. So that means it becomes platform independent. Okay, just like JVM. Okay, so entire kind of Java is platform independent. JVM is platform dependent, by the way. Java is platform independent. So similar to Java, REST API, you can imagine it like a platform independence. Okay, statelessness. So each request, each and every call you are making from Postman or from UI, that call doesn't remember. Once the entire flow is over, it will forget that flow. It will forget that request. Okay, so that means it's stateless. So whenever there is each and every request is being sent to the controller, okay, then that what happens? Once the entire flow of request gets completed and the response you are getting, you got the response, then it will forget what request it was sent. Okay, so the remembrance or the memory is with one time request and response cycle. So that is, it maintains the statelessness of the entire cycle. Okay, which simplifies the scaling and load distribution mechanism. That is second advantage. Third advantage is ease of integration. So it's widely supported and it's easy to integrate with other services and clients. Okay, so you can take one of the REST API endpoints and you can easily integrate with other services. Okay, so that means it's very easy to plug and play. Fourth point is caching support is there. Okay, so you can enable it with the help of certain annotation. Okay, so you can add enable caching over a class, and then you can add cacheable annotation over a method, and then within that you can pass like which all kind of fields you want to cache it. So that is the very important concept present in REST API. So you can signify like once data is being fetched from database, what kind of fields you want to put in the cache memory. So in big billion days, you have observed like few kind of products are being purchased again and again, again and again. So those kind of products can be put into the cache memory. So what will happen? So 80% of the products will, rest of the people will not buy. So there will be 20% of the products which 80% people are buying. So those 20% products data, if I put it into the cache, then what will happen? The performance will be increased drastically, because again and again, those 20% of the products will be called by the customers again and again by clicking. So it will not fetch data from database. It will directly fetch data from the cache. Okay, I hope you got the importance of caching. So actually REST API can leverage this HTTP caching mechanism, and it reduces load on the server drastically. Okay, so this is one of the major advantage. Next advantage is flexible data formats. So it will not focus upon only XML type data. It can take JSON type data also. It can take XML type data also, and can handle various data formats like XML, HTML, or any other type of data also. It can be like a XLSX type of data, or it can be in the form of text format also, zip format also. It can take the data based upon that, and it will process it. Okay, but the file format will be, it can take REST, it can take XML also, it can take JSON type also. Okay, so that is the major advantage with REST APIs. But SOAP UI will not be able to take the JSON format. SOAP UI will take only the XML format in a request part. So that is the difference between REST and SOAP UIs. Okay. Then what are the disadvantages for REST API? It lacks standardization. There is no strict guidelines. So anybody can write REST endpoints in any format. Okay, it leads to inconsistency in the REST implementations. So there is no proper methodology or guidelines like we have to do it this way only. Okay, it's not like that. So there is lack standardization at some point, but it's okay. And until unless it serves our purpose. Okay, and overfetching or underfetching concept is there. Like REST APIs may return unnecessary data, or it misdetails a lot of things. So let's suppose I in the UI I want only 3 or 4 fields, but 20 fields are coming. Okay, so it's up to us like which all fields we want to give to UI. But still, if we are giving 20 fields, so in between there is no filtering criteria. So UI people, what they can do, they will filter out like I want these 4 fields only to show onto the UI screen. So I will show only these 4 fields. I will not show other fields. So unnecessary details may come to the UI. So they have to handle it separately. Okay. Third is no built-in security. So REST relies on external security mechanism like JWT if you are implementing, or OAuth you are implementing, or Okta kind of security you are implementing. So it basically depends or relies on external security mechanism. Spring doesn't have its own security mechanism. So that is one of the important concepts. Okay, we have to add the dependency for Spring security. So REST API doesn't come inbuilt with Spring security concept. Okay, that is the thing which I want to tell you, which adds the complexity in the code. So if you have observed the security part of the code, you might have gone through it like it is a little bit more complex as in particular to normal REST API flows. You might have understood it if you have gone through some of the security kind of code. Okay, especially if you go through JWT, or if you are going to implement OAuth, there are a lot of configurations that we have to do. And if you don't know how to configure, you will get stuck, and you will not be able to do the configuration of your Okta or OAuth configuration for your Spring security. So you should be knowing like which all fields, which all classes you have to make use of for doing the configuration part. So it makes it more complex. Okay, next is limited flexibility with complex transactions. So handling complex transaction across multiple resources can be a little bit challenging. Okay, there are multiple kind of distributed transaction happens, like the transaction is distributed across multiple services. So to handle that complex transaction, it becomes a little bit difficult. We need to provide certain isolation level, we need to give certain propagation level, like transaction which all methods you want to have a transaction upon. Do you want to do the rollback upon the entire set of methods, or you want to do rollback on particular methods, or you want to roll back all the methods of a class? Then you have to put it over a class level. So it becomes a little bit more complex, right? Yeah. So it increases the complexity of the transaction. This is one of the disadvantage. Another is version. So they can be challenging, okay, because backward compatibility when you are doing. So let's suppose a developer is coming and he is making any changes into the code. Okay, so that version has been updated as version 1.0.1. Okay, So whenever there is another person who is trying to modify the existing code, so then what will happen, the new version will get generated. So we have to maintain the backward compatibility. Okay, so while changing the API version, which actually increases the complexity of the code. Okay, so version challenges can also be there. So these are some of the disadvantages of the REST API. So if you remember two or three of them, so it becomes very much easy to answer in the interview. Okay, so they may not expect you to answer all 5 points, but if you are able to tell 2 to 3 points, then also it will be very much good for you. So let's go ahead. Let's understand about the Spring Data JPA. So we all have worked upon Spring Data JPA, Spring Boot, okay, Spring concepts. So Spring JPA also have some of the advantages and disadvantages. So you might be thinking like, how Spring Data JPA can have disadvantages. There are a lot of features in Spring Data JPA. Just with one method, you can call and you can fetch the data from database. You can update the data. You can just add modifiable annotation and you can write update query and it will update the data. There are a lot of advantages. Then why Spring Data JPA? What are the disadvantages? Yes, Spring Data JPA also has certain set of disadvantages. So let's understand that. So first, before going to disadvantages, let's understand what are the advantages of Spring Data JPA. So first is automatic CRUD operation. So Spring JPA simplifies the operation. So if you understand the flow, so what will be there in the flow? The first will be the normal CRUD repository. Okay, then comes paging and sorting repository, then comes JPA repository, and then comes the repository interface. So this is the hierarchy of entire repository structure. So in that, JPA contains the structures or methods of CRUD repository as well as paging and sorting repositories. So it becomes advantage position for the data JPA. Okay, so automatic CRUD operations will be there, paging and sorting kind of methods will be there. It will automatically be included in the Spring JPA. So basically, it simplifies the CRUD operation. Okay. Second point is it abstracts the database interaction. So whatever database interaction is there to save the data into DB or to fetch data from the DB, it will automatically generate the SQL query. Okay. So whenever you are writing any form of query, so you can write it in two ways. Either you can write Hibernate query or you can write SQL query. So if you are writing SQL query, so you have to provide native query equal to true after writing the query. Okay. So what will happen after that? It will extract the data based upon the query you have written in @query annotation over the repository layer method. Okay. So that is the way we have to implement, or else you can provide the Hibernate query as well. So internally, it will run the query. Okay. So you may or may not be knowing SQL query. That is fine. But if you are writing Hibernate query, it will be applicable for all kind of database. Let's suppose today you are making use of Oracle SQL. In later stage of time, you might be making use of MySQL. You might be making use of PostgreSQL or MongoDB. But if you are making use of Hibernate query, it will be applicable for all kind of databases. Okay, so that flexibility Spring Data JPA provides to us. Okay, and pagination and sorting is inbuilt. So I've already told you, paging and sorting repository comes as a child class for this JPA repository. Okay, so paging and sorting function will automatically be imbibed into it. So it provides built-in pagination and sorting for managing large set of data. Another advantage is it supports JPQL and criteria API. Okay, so if you understand about this, there is a JPQL query is there. Okay, so you can write your own query with the help of annotation. Okay, you can provide your own query over there. You can create a criteria for that, and then you can call multiple methods for the criteria, and then you can execute the query, all the Hibernate queries one by one. And this is actually the old way. Okay, we are not making use of criteria much. Okay, so when we were making use of JDBC, then mostly we were making use of criteria kind of thing. So here in JPA, everything is automated. Just you have to provide the query and it will fetch you the data or update the data in database or enter the data as a new resource into the database. It depends upon your requirement. Okay. Next is transaction management. So it offers transaction handling through annotation. So if you are writing at the repository, so automatically any kind of exception is coming while saving data into database or while fetching data or any kind of issue is coming, it will handle that. It will not just break it. So at the resource, at the repository is a kind of stereotype annotation. So if you are using that, it will automatically handle it. And if you are updating data into database, so you can make use of annotation like @modifiable. Okay, so if you are making use of those annotations, then what will happen, it will handle the kind of exceptions. So when you are doing any kind of interaction with database, so there can be a chance of like constraint, unique constraint violation exception, or if you want to fetch the data which is not there in database, so it may throw certain kind of exception, or it may throw any empty value, so you can handle it using optional class. So these kind of things are there. Okay, so it will handle those exceptions. So that is the quality of a Spring JPA. Okay, so these are some of the advantages of Spring Data JPA. I hope you got a clarity on this. So now let's jump onto some of the disadvantages of Spring Data JPA, which you all were waiting for. Okay, what are the disadvantages of microservice? Sorry, Spring Data JPA. So first is performance overhead. So there is automatic SQL generation. It can lead to sometimes inefficient queries. So if there is a lot of joins you are applying, there are multiple tables, and you are making use of union queries, union within the queries. Okay, so in that scenario, what will happen? It may generate some inefficient query, or it may take a lot of time to execute that query. So there can be performance overhead. So you need to know like how can you manage the query. So whenever there is a need to join multiple tables, like multiple union operation you have to do, so in that scenario, you may have to go for native query. As per my experience, I'm telling, we were making use of native query during paging and sorting mechanism when we have to maintain a long form of queries to join multiple tables together to fetch the data. Okay, so during that time, you have to make use of native query. Okay, so that it becomes a little bit more complex, and the queries may become more inefficient. Okay, because of which it decreases the performance of the queries. Okay, then second point is it is having limited control over queries. Okay, so advanced query may require some custom implementation of SQL. Okay, so it limits the abstraction. So sometimes when the query becomes very complex, so you have to write the SQL query or native query. Okay, so for that you need to know like what is SQL and how to write queries in SQL. So it sometimes it limits the control over the queries, and it creates a problem of abstraction as well. Okay, third problem is tight coupling. So with Spring Framework, we are focused more upon light coupling or loose coupling, right? Because of which there is auto wiring concept is there, or inversion of control concept is there to make the classes more and more loosely coupled. Okay, but with Spring Data JPA, there can be tight coupled. So you will think like how Spring Data JPA can have tight coupling. So if you see like it heavily relies on Spring, okay, which makes it less flexible with other frameworks. So if it is working with Spring Boot framework, it is fine. But if it is relying with multiple frameworks, then it will be a tightly coupled scenario. Okay, so it's highly relying on the Spring part. Okay. Now the next important thing is debugging complexity. So the generated SQL can be very hard to debug. So let's suppose you have written a very long query joining multiple tables together with lot of union queries, union you are writing between the queries. So whenever you will go for debugging the query, it becomes very much difficult to understand like why the output is not coming. Sometimes in the initial phase, you will not get the right output which you were expecting from that query to return, but you are not able to find it out. Like you are not able to debug. Like in this much big query, where can be the issue? I'm not able to find the issue. So that becomes very much hard. You have to manually write each and every line. You have to manually check in the SQL, like where it is the issue. Then you have to find it out. So it becomes very much tedious, and it is much more time taking. Okay. So debugging complexity increases because it's not a normal Java code, right? It's a query. You can't debug query. So it becomes a little bit challenging to understand like where is the issue. Okay. Next is learning curve. So writing complex query, especially with criteria API, it's a little bit difficult for beginners to understand because beginners are not very much friendly working with criteria APIs kind of thing. So they need to learn, they need to understand the flow. And after understanding also while implementing, they may face a lot of challenges with respect to criteria API. So that also we have to understand. So these are some of the main disadvantages of Spring Data JPA. I hope you got some clarity on this. What is next? Next is Spring Boot. Okay, so if Spring Data JPA has some advantage, disadvantage, then Spring Boot can also have advantage and disadvantage. Okay, so you might be thinking like there are a lot of advantages of Spring Boot, like it is auto configuration feature is there. It is having at the red Spring Boot application. Within that, there are three annotations imbibed into it, which makes them automatically loosely coupled. Then why there is disadvantage of Spring Boot? So let's understand. But before going to disadvantage, let's understand what are the advantages of Spring Boot. So first advantage, you all know the rapid application development process is there. Like you don't need to configure. Our main focus will be to write the business logic. Our main focus is to serve the client with what logic they are telling us to implement. So the entire concept entire focus will be towards writing the actual business logic rather than configuring Tomcat or any other kind of configuration. We will not be focusing into all sorts of configuration, which actually speeds up the development cycle. So you will automatically will see while doing the transition from Spring to Spring Boot, you will see like your code is getting finished in half the time when you are doing with Spring and when you are doing transition to Spring Boot. So in Spring Boot, you will observe that you are completing the code much faster with less number of configurations. Okay, so this is one of the major advantage, and it you will prepare the code production ready. As soon as you are writing the code, automatically it becomes production ready because there is not much configurations needed. So this is one of the major advantage. Second is standalone application. It provides embedded servers like Tomcat or Jetty. Okay, so if you don't want to make use of Tomcat, Tomcat server is actually embedded. So if you don't want to make use of Tomcat, you can add it in exclusion tag. Okay, and then you can include a Jetty server, and then you can make use for it for deployment. So it makes the deployment much and more easier. Okay, so this is one of the important concept. It makes the application standalone. Okay. Third is microservice friendly. So it simplifies creation and deploying microservices with Spring Cloud support. So Spring Cloud has its own dependency. We can utilize that Spring Cloud dependency. Okay. We can utilize that library, and with the help of that, you can do fault tolerance mechanism also you can do, or you can deploy it onto the cloud as well. So it becomes much more microservice friendly. Another important point is auto configuration. So it will automatically configure all the Spring beans which are present inside your application, okay, based on the dependencies. So there are two ways. Either you can have bean configuration by yourself. So let's suppose you want to manually configure bean of the database kind of configuration. You don't want to make use of application or properties or YAML file to fetch the database database configurations. Rather than you need to create your own method with @bean annotations on the top of it, and we have to configure all the database related thing like username, password. You want to put it in a code part, not from YAML file. So there you can configure your own bean, and then you can auto wire that into your code like a data source kind of thing. Okay, so this is the way you can configure your own bean, or else you can directly auto wire it. It's up to you, like whether you want to configure manually or you want to auto wire it from the main class. So there are two ways of doing it. Okay, so auto configuration feature makes it much more simple and flexible to use for Spring Boot. Okay, so you don't have to configure anything. It will automatically configure all the dependencies in the class path. That extensive ecosystem is there. It offers built-in integration with Spring Boot projects like Spring Data, Spring Security. It reduces the setup time because whenever you are downloading the dependencies, whenever you are adding the dependency, it will automatically download all the libraries or packages, okay, from the Maven central repositories. So you don't need to focus upon anything in setup kind of thing. Everything will be automatically done by auto configuration feature. So this is one of the most important concept in Spring Boot. So we have learned about what all advantages are there. So now let's jump on to see what are the disadvantages of Spring Boot. So if you see, there are multiple disadvantages of Spring Boot. Okay, so first disadvantage is it's resource intensive. Okay, so embedded servers, there it can be H2 embedded server, it can be like any Jetty embedded server, it can be any embedded server. It can increase the resource of footprint. Okay, so it's very much resource intensive. A lot of resources it may take to execute a process. So it reduces the performance drastically because of that. Second is debugging becomes very much complex. So auto configuration is there. Everything is being auto configured by Spring Boot. So how will you debug? Like where is the issue? Whenever you are facing any difficulty, so you will face a lot of exceptions when you will start working on Spring Boot. Like this bean is not configured. Okay, so you have to qualify the bean. Your bean is not yet qualified, but if you don't know the concept, you will not be able to identify like from where this exception is coming, because everything is automatically configured. So auto configuration has some of its advantages and disadvantages. So that we have to understand. Third is dependency management. So Spring Boot's dependency versions might conflict with some other custom versions. Okay, so if you are putting certain kind of dependencies, okay, in the Spring Boot starter parent, it actually maintains the versions of all the dependencies. But still, if you are adding some other kind of dependency versions which are not compatible with Spring Boot current version, so let's suppose you are making use of Spring Boot 2.0.x, but for other dependencies within that Spring Boot 2.0.x, you are making use of some Spring Boot 3 versions dependencies. so it will not support, right? So it has limited control over the configuration. We should be knowing like which Spring Boot you are using, and corresponding to that Spring Boot, which version it is compatible with. So it's good to automatically let Spring Boot configure. Don't put version over there. It will automatically find it out like which is the best version as per the current role. Okay, as per current system, what actual version can be configured now. But if you are putting up your own version, which it's generally happening in the real-time projects, you have to provide your own version for the dependencies which you are putting. So for that, each and every time you have to observe like which dependency is not vulnerable, which dependency is not means bug free. Okay, we need to see that, because if there are some dependencies I've observed that are vulnerable, we can't put that in the dependency part. If you are putting it in dependency, then it will not function properly. Okay, so it may lead to a lot of issues in later in later time. Okay, so it's required that you should not put vulnerable dependencies. So those versions you have to find out which are not vulnerable, and that we have to put it in the dependency part. So it makes it little bit more complex to understand like which versions are useful to use over there. Okay, next is increased startup time. So embedded components can lead to longer startup times. So more and more components are embedded, the more time it will take to start up, especially in very complex application where there are a lot of features are embedded into it. So these are some of the disadvantages. So if you can explain two or three of them, it will be more than enough. Okay. Next, understand Spring security part. So Spring security. So Spring was there, Spring Boot is there, Spring Data JPA is there, then Spring security. But Spring security also has some of the advantages and disadvantages. So what are the advantages of Spring security? Let's understand that. So comprehensive authentication and authorization feature is there. Like it covers all major security concerns, like what are the roles, what are the permission, okay, what kind of users are coming, whether they are getting admin role or not, whether they are getting normal user role, what kind of role they are getting. So we can grant them based upon what kind of authentication, like basic authentication, form-based authentication, what kind of authentication mechanism you are following for that user role. So those are things you can provide. So there is an extensive role. So REST API doesn't have its own security, but if you are having the dependency of Spring security, then you can make use of any kind of Spring security feature. So as soon as you have the Spring security dependency, then you will automatically see whenever you are trying to hit the database, it will not allow. It will tell you to enter the username and password. So automatically by adding the dependency of Spring security, you will see like the entire application will get secured. So that is the power of Spring security. Okay. Second is integration with multiple protocols. It supports Spring security generally supports OAuth, JWT, SAML, LDAP, okay, Okta. So there are a lot of things it will support, which makes it more and more versatile, and it's a little bit complex to implement. You should know what all classes to implement, what all classes you have to make use of, what all configurations you have to do. But once you know the entire flow, it becomes easy. Okay. And the third point is it has a declarative security by annotation. So there is annotations like added pre-authorized. Okay, so for any kind of security roles to manage, we need to have a pre-authorization mechanism to check whether that particular person is authorized to enter into particular section of that database or user or portal kind of thing or not. So there should be a pre-authorization mechanism for that. So that pre-authorization will check for that particular user. So this is the kind of thing, and everything will be handled with annotations only. So it makes much and more easy to implement. Okay. Then automatic session management is there. So whenever one session is being imbibed into it, so that session will have a certain lifespan with certain cookies enabled into it. So once that cookie session is being over, then automatically we have to send a new request. So that session management system is automatically being handled by Spring Security. Next is built-in protection. So it is having CSRF, XSS. So built-in, it is having built-in protection against this CSRF and XSS. Okay, it provides default security protection against the common security vulnerabilities. Okay, so these are the major advantages for Spring Security. I hope you are able to understand it. So these are certain points you have to remember. Okay, so they may ask you what are the advantages of these, what are the disadvantages of these. So some pointers you should keep it in your mind. Okay. Then let's understand what are the disadvantages of Spring Security. First is steep learning curve. So setting up, I told you before, right? The configuration part is very much challenging. Setting up all the security configuration is a little bit more challenging, especially if you start from JWT. You will be confused with a lot of things like why this class is being used, why this configuration is being used. Once you understand the flow and the process, then it becomes easy. But in the initial days, it becomes a little challenging to implement the security part. Okay, I faced the challenges, so you all might face it. Okay, complex configuration, that is again very important. So customizing the Spring security configuration, it requires extensive knowledge of the framework. You should be knowing like which all classes we need to implement, user detail service we need to extend to get certain data for that. Okay, so there is web security configuration adapter which we have to extend. Within that, there is do HTTP method is there. HTTP reference, we have to pass it in a method parameter. So there are a lot of things that we have to remember before actually going ahead with implementation of the security configuration part. Okay. Third is performance override. The security layer adds more processing. So before actually calling the main endpoint for processing the service logics, business logic, before that only there is a security layer. Within that there is a lot of processing happening, so there is a processing overhead, like which can impact the performance. Okay, which can reduce the level of performance. So if you run the application without security, you will see like there is a change in the response time. Okay, so without security the response time was faster. When you add the security, you will see response time will little bit reduce. Okay, so but that is fine, because if there is a data breach, then your entire application will be gone. So that is fine, but you have to manage in such a way that response time should not be very much high. So that also we have to understand. Next is limited flexibility with default settings. So if you are putting default settings, then it will not work the way you want it. So you have to configure a lot of things. If you are putting it in a default configuration mode, it will may or may not work out based upon your project requirements. So in most of the cases, you have to provide your own configuration, which makes it less flexible. Okay. Next point is debugging challenges. So debugging challenges are there with REST APIs, with microservices, and with Spring Security as well. So diagnosing like where is the issue, from where the issue is coming, you will face a lot of challenge over there. So after configuration, everything you have done. So let's suppose you are trying to run the code to check the security, like whether it's working fine or not. So sometimes it may throw very vague exception. You will not be able to find it out, like from where this exception is being thrown, where is the problem in the code. So you have to break your head to understand like from where this issue is coming. So that also is very much challenging over here. So debugging challenges we need to understand. So you need to have the good knowledge, comprehensive knowledge of the entire Spring security before going ahead with debugging. Okay, first of all, you will not be able to debug properly, like from where it is coming, because everything is configuration based. You can't debug all the configurations. You need to know like from where this exception is coming, then only you can go ahead and fix that issue. I hope you got the clarity on this. Next, understand about the Docker. Okay, so this is, I think, the last part. This is very important. Okay, so this I haven't faced much question on this Docker part, but still there is a chance that they may ask you, like if you are making use of Docker or Kubernetes, then what are the advantages or what are the disadvantages of making use of Docker? You will think like Docker is fine. It's good for creating the jars of it. It is very much like all our advantages only we have heard. Then what can be the disadvantages? Yes, there is some disadvantages. So let's understand about the disadvantage. But before going there, let's understand advantages first. So advantages first, like environment consistency is there. So it is a, like there's a container, okay, which ensures like there is consistent environment is there across all the code. Okay, so if one code is deployed in one of the region, if you are making use of that code in another region or in production environment, that code may fail. So you will break your head over there. Like this code is working in developed region, but this code is not working in production region or UAT region. Why? Same code. So there can be a chance of configuration issue. Okay, so what Docker does, Docker creates a jar of all the configurations, all the configuration setup which was there in case of developer region where you actually ran that code. So it will create a jar of it. Okay, and it will put the entire set of configuration and will transport it to different environments. Okay, so whenever you will run the code in different environments, so it will run with that configurations which was set up in that developed environment. That name will change. For UAT, it will be UAT. For SIT, it will be SIT. For prod, it will be prod. But a configuration system, like what all configurations you have done, that will be getting configured for different environments. So that is the advantage for making use of Docker. So it is resource efficiency is there. Like containers use fewer resources than actually the virtual machines are being used. So it is very much efficient with the resources. So it makes use of very less resources and it just it will do your task with very less resources than actual virtual machines is being used. Okay, so this is also important advantage for Docker. Third is portability. Container can run on any system, okay, with Docker installed. So any system where Docker is being installed, containers can run on that. Okay, it makes deployment very, very easier. Okay, so next is isolation. It provides a high degree of application isolation, which enhances the security of the entire system. Okay, so this high degree of application isolation, what will happen? It will isolate your application in such a way that there is no kind of breaching will happen, and your code will make sure that if it is working in one environment, it will work in another environments as well. Okay, so it enhances the security, so nobody can attack the your code like SQL injection or any other kind of injection can happen, right? So it will provide the security of the entire application. Okay, next is scalability. It is very much easily scalable, especially in case of microservices, which makes use of rapid deployment of the containers. So you have heard about rapid application deployment for Spring Boot, right? So similar to that, in Docker also there is rapid deployment of the containers. Okay, so these are some of the advantages of the Dockers. So now let's understand what are the disadvantages of the Docker. Okay, so these are some of the disadvantages of Docker. One is persistent storage challenge. So managing the data persistence with containers, it can be a little bit tricky. So there can be various kind of data, and to persist that along with a container. So there can be a set of containers which contains that set of data, which needs to manage. So each and every time, along with the time, the data might change. So we have to persist the data with the containers. So it becomes very much tricky. Okay, then complex networking. So networking between the containers, especially across the host, it increases the complexity of the entire system. Okay, so that is one of the major disadvantage. Third is security risk. So containers actually shares the OS kernel. Okay, it increases the potential security risk. Okay, because the OS kernel is the core of the entire application, right? It should not be shared. So if you are sharing the OS kernel of the container, okay, across entire set of application, then what will happen? It will increase the risk of the particular application. So security is being breached over there. So security risk is the major concern over there that we have to understand, like what kind of OS kernel are you using, so where and all it is being shared, so you have to monitor those things. Okay, then limited OS support. Containers don't work with non-Linux. So whenever you have to make use of Docker, we have to make sure that it is being used over Linux. So if it is non-Linux, without additional configurations, your containers will not work. So there's separate set of configurations you have to do before actually going ahead with making use of Docker to deploy your services. Okay, but for Linux, it doesn't require any kind of those configuration. Extra configurations will not be required. So that is the disadvantage over there. Okay, next is resource limitation. So resource allocation needs careful tuning to see like whether there is any issue with the performance or not. So because it requires very less resources to process your data to create over the container, right? So we have to carefully observe like is there any issue with the performance or not, because resources are less, right? So it can be a chance like performance will be drastically go down due to any reason in the container, and there are not multiple resources to check it out like why the performance has gone down. So there can be a lot of issue with the performance with respect to lack of much resources. So these are some of the disadvantages of Docker. So we have covered a lot of advantages and disadvantages based topics in Java and Spring Boot along with the DevOps Docker. So I hope you have liked the entire thing, you have liked the entire concept. So this is the end of it. So here it's Devjit Roy. I am 7+ years of experience in IT sector. So I teach topics on this Java, Spring Boot, REST API, microservices, and these things. So if you like my content, please like, share, and subscribe my video. We'll go ahead with the next set of topics in the next upcoming videos. So stay tuned and we'll see you in the next videos. Till then, it's Devjit Roy signing off. Bye bye.